Hello, everyone, and welcome to this HEC Paris virtual conference room for our HEC Insights webinar. When joining the conference, you will notice that your microphones have been switched off because of the webinar format of this event. You will, however, be able to ask questions and make comments using the Q&A menu that you will find at the bottom of your Zoom window in your Zoom toolbar. The speakers will only answer questions and read comments sent through the Q&A menu and will not be taking any question coming from the chat. Please be aware that questions in the Q&A menu can be upvoted by clicking on the thumbs up icon and thus prioritized on the speaker's dashboard. Make sure that you keep the chat for technical questions to our team only. We would like to remind you that this webinar is also broadcasted on HEC Paris Executive Education's YouTube channel. We will now begin, and I'll leave the floor to Anne Michaud, Associate Dean for Faculty, Education, Track, and Pedagogy at HEC, to introduce our guest of today. Anne?
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome, and thank you very much for being with us today. I am Anne Michaud, Associate Dean for Pedagogy at HEC Paris, and it is my greatest pleasure to welcome Caroline Guillaumin, who holds two roles at Société Générale, Head of Human Resources and Worldwide Head of Corporate Communications. These two roles place her at a very strategic location to help set up the return to work policies, as well as communicate them to customers and employees. And I know the notion of working with a purpose is essential for her, so we will also touch upon this today. It is also my greatest pleasure to welcome my colleague, Michael Segalla, Professor of Management and Human Resources at HEC Paris. Michael has just published a new book on international employee engagement, where he introduces the concept of COVID KPIs, and we are going to talk about this today. But of course, we are also going to talk about the future, the pandemic's lasting impact on the physical and psychological welfare of employees. So thank you both for accepting the invitation to talk into our HEC Paris webinar today, titled Back to Work, Re-engaging Work from Home Employees. I am very happy to open this webinar with a question maybe to you both. I think you were both, for different reasons, at the epicenter of everything that happened in the last year, and I should say months, because it's over a year now. But I think for some of our audience, it might be a little bit more unknown, everything that has been going on from an HR point of view in the last period. So I think it would be useful to really go back to the main lessons of the COVID period and to understand better what we've been going through from an HR point of view. So I don't know, Caroline Guillaumin, maybe you want to start with this question to know what happened.
Thank you very much, Anne, and hi, everyone. Very happy to be here with us, and thank you very much to HEC for the invitation. So, yes, I think the first maybe thing I would like to remind everyone is that, and I've been going through a major crisis in my career. I think this is the worst I experienced, and I think we just need to remember this. And maybe because it was at the same time a worldwide crisis, but also something that really touched the human side. And this is the worst and very difficult crisis we have to experience. You know, announcing death, I mean, having to cope with this notion of pandemic and death. If I look at the first element I would like to share is the fact that the crisis was not the same during the whole period. You talked about 18 months. There is really different type of reaction or things we had to do when we were in the first part, which is really the worst one, let's say, during the lockdown, the first lockdown, that was kind of a consideration, you know, shock for everyone. And then when you go to the different lockdown, that was quite different, even in the behaviors of our employees and the behaviors also as HR. If I look at the lessons, and, you know, I'm not going to come back on the crisis mode we had to experience, the working from home in 2 or 3 days we had to put together. This was the experience for everyone in the world. Maybe the first thing I would like to share is that things that required actually months in the past was done in a few days. And I think that was maybe the first lesson, is the capacity we had to react I would say, putting everyone in teleworking in 2 days. I mean, you could talk to the IT guys in the past. They would say it's just impossible. You cannot do that. It won't sustain. It happened. Also, when you talked about the managerial posture, in the past, you would say if you want to change people, if you want to really change manager to accompany employees, most of the people would say, and I would be the first to say, it will require months to have our managers accepting and even, do the right things to accompany people. Well, it was done in, weeks. So this is maybe the first lesson. The second is that the manager role changed drastically, and I'm sure we will come back to that with Michael. But we had to transform manager into people that really care about people, caring, asking questions, and in the past. This is even the question you wouldn't ask employees. How are you? How is your health? Are you sick? Did you get COVID and stuff like that? We actually told and we asked a manager to actually be there and ask questions about the personal life of our employees. How are they, their daughters, their son, their parents. That's really changing completely. And we had, even on the paper, we said in the past, in webinar like this one, yes, you have to have a manager that is a coach. But in reality, that was not really happening. Well, there you had actually to have this role as the manager. And maybe the last one is that we really experience the fact of having to accelerate the digitalization of our HR system much rapidly than what we had to do in the past. So this is, in a nutshell, I would say, some of the lessons I would draw from this terrible moment.
Right. Thank you very much. And on your side, Michael, this is the moment that you were busy writing a book. So potentially, I think it changed also a number of things in your vision. I know specifically you wrote recently an article for Forbes where you talk about COVID KPIs, but what brought you in your observations to talk about COVID KPIs?
Well, thanks for that question. It's an interesting one because, as you were saying, I was writing a book with the colleagues. It's an edited book with academics from Africa, North America, and Europe on the issue of employee engagement. And so the editors, it's Routledge, the editors said, well, can you add, because this is right, you're finishing this right with COVID happening. COVID is actually going to have an impact on employee engagement. Can you put something in about that? So we did that. We created a questionnaire based upon interviews with executives like Caroline that we then distributed to our different social networks to find out what would companies do differently when they have to evaluate the annual performance reviews of employees, particularly when the employees are scattered around different places. How are you going to do it? So that we can talk later about that, but that's one of the things we wanted to take a look at. And at the same time, there's another thing that I've been working on for the last couple of years with the London School of Economics. We did a different survey on the use of technology and how young people and middle-aged people and managers are accepting the use of technology in managing their careers, managing HR issues, recruiting, evaluation, et cetera. And so a lot of the new technology is based upon some kind of digital tracking or digital monitoring on software or watches or whatever. And so that sort of played into it at the same time, because before it was just like a fun thing. But now companies, when they have their employees, 80% of employees are not at the office and they're scattered around, they still have to keep track of them. And it's probably very tempting to use those digital tools. Now, will the employees accept it or not? That's the big question. We can talk about that a little bit later on too. So those sort of, all those things sort of create a perfect storm that got me involved in this.
May I add something, and maybe a thing I forgot to say, which is actually major. One of the lessons we draw, and I think as human beings, that's one of the lessons we all draw, is the fact that we need social link. But as a company, I think we discovered also how much we need the social link, the informal meeting. And, I'm in favor of everything, the Zoom, the Skype, the Teams, whatever. And, that's exactly what Michael was talking about, this, proliferation of communication tools. But there's one thing that we learned is that we just cannot sustain a company without this link with a place, somewhere where you actually can have informal meeting, brainstorming, creation. I think that that's really something that I would like to insist on. You can have working from home and having all the system in the world. It will never replace this capacity of connecting and having this bond together.
That's right. So I'm going to now do something which we usually don't do, but I think it really makes sense here to do it, is I see a first question from Olivier. We usually take questions at the end, but now he says, so why is it that we had to go through this to change the organization paradigm? So what he says is we started the journey around changing the way companies function and so on before COVID. But so why did we have to wait until such situation appear to be aware of the fact that we can change the organization paradigm? So I don't know if Michael, you want to answer from the academic perspective, and maybe Caroline from the practical.
Well, from the academic perspective, there is a very famous sort of idea about satisficing. Are you getting things just enough done that you can continue going on for the next day? You don't actually try to optimize. And so from that particular perspective, the things we were doing in the past, they satisfied the needs at the time. And then suddenly those needs drastically change. And so you got to figure out something else to do. It's sort of like you might have a tiny little leak in your boat and you don't stop to fix it because you got a pump that pumps it out. But then you get a torpedo in it and it's a huge hole. And suddenly now you got to panic and you got to figure out what to do.
And maybe I would add, and I totally agree, I would add that there is this, when you are in crisis mode, which unfortunately for me, I experienced for the last 30 years in my jobs, there is the pressure of the moment. And it really do something on people, just, thinking that they can, they have to do things now. And there's something also, and this is more linked, for example, I had questions on, we wanted to do working from home, but then, it was not possible. And there's one thing that was lacking was the trust. A lot of managers didn't trust their employees to do the job when they were not in the building. And the crisis, actually, when we put everyone in this working from home system, was that suddenly managers lived and experienced that they could trust the people. They could trust people being not next to them, but very far away, and the work was done. Because believe me, during this crisis, the work was done, and it was amazing. I have to say that, we need to really think about all these people that were working in very difficult situation, very different experience. In places where the Wi-Fi was not there sometimes, nothing was working, and they did the job. They did the job for, their manager. They did the job for the customers. And I think this is exactly what is important in this kind of situation, is that when a manager is scared about, this new situation, when he sees that it works and that he can trust the employee, then you have the change. And this is how you experience change.
All right. Thank you very much. So we are going to continue. Now we talked about what happened in the last 18 months. I think what everybody really wants to hear about is what's going to happen now. And in fact, the impact of the pandemic on the future of HR management is probably what we're more up to, because today, really the challenge is to re-attract employees and to re-attract everybody at work. But how much will company eventually return to a typical work at the office model, or will the hybrid model frequently discussed today as the new normal will be the new normal? So this is really a question to both of you, to see what are the desirable and acceptable conditions from both the employer and the employee perspective, because we can have desirable conditions that are not the acceptable ones, or from an employee perspective or from an employer perspective. So what is your take on this?
You want me to start?
Let's go.
All right. Maybe first to say, as an HR, I have to say, and I think all managers in companies at the moment are seeing the future as being very complex. And a lot of people are seeing like, oh, this is the end of the crisis, which, by the way, I don't believe at all. But, okay, it's reopening, lockdown is over, and so on. So they have this feeling that we're going to go from the crisis mode to a normal situation. I don't believe it's going to happen. The first reason is because we don't know the impacts of this crisis. We have no clue. So we can discuss about the mental health. We can discuss about the physical impact just on COVID people. A lot of us had COVID. What are the impacts? How are we going to be actually fit for work? We know there's going to be a lot of people that will have difficulties. The second is that we don't know, and we begin to see impacts on motivation of people. You were talking about what is acceptable, what is not. Motivation. So I see people decided during the crisis to actually change their life. They are going to, 2 or 3 hours from Paris. They're changing completely life. And very interestingly, and this is coming also from what I experienced as being the impacts during the crisis, first lockdown, collective aspects, people were very supportive, collective, thinking about, the company, the nation, and so on. Second, third lockdown, individual. What is it for me? I think I have, desire. And this is really a shift for me that is extremely important that I see now. We have now employees that are no longer into this collective aspect, but are really into individual aspect. And what that means is that they're coming back and they're talking to us and saying, look, I changed my life. What are you going to be doing for me? And my point is that this is not how, we as HR are going to look at the situation. I need to make sure that whatever we do is going to be good for the company, good for the employees, of course. But if there's no balance, it's not going to happen. So, for example, you decided that you want to go very far away from your point of work. And working from home is going to be hybrid. So we're going to have 2 to 3 days, in working from home, and then you will have to come back. And that's not going to be, okay, I choose to come back. I don't choose to come back. No, you want to live in a collective company, then you will need to, make some arbitration. And the third things as the future that I would say, and this is answering your question also, Anne, is to say, there's no coming back to the former life. So I don't want to talk about the life after or whatever. I'm just saying that for me, as an HR, there's no coming back to the old way of working, or, and I see a really very interesting positioning between, for example, French banks that are very active in saying future of work is going to be hybrid. And for example, Anglo-Saxon and sometimes, American banks that say, no way, we're coming back to the old way of working. And of course, I have my point of view, which is there's no coming back. For me, we need to shift really to a new way of working.
Right. So, Michael, I know you had this on your agenda also to think about those elements. You've been working about the notion of work-life balance as well. In your articles, you trace the rise of burnout, work-life balance, employee engagement, and so on. We also have questions already in the chat about the employee engagement. So I don't know what you want to start with. Maybe we can start with this first, the question of what is desirable and acceptable for employees for tomorrow.
Okay, well, let me first just respond to Caroline because she brought out some super interesting points there. I was actually in North America getting ready to start a benchmarking tour for executives from HEC back a year ago when the tour was canceled the day I was there. Okay, 2 students had arrived and the rest are thinking about coming on a plane the next day, so we canceled it. Now, the reason we canceled it is, of course, because COVID was beginning to cause lockdowns and quarantines. What I noticed back then is the politicians were slower to respond than the companies. And I think that, somebody's probably said something to like, the art of politics is not making everybody unhappy, okay, at the same time. And what I saw is that companies were more concerned with their employees than the politicians were with the citizens. And they acted quickly and they closed down their firms. They put people at home, et cetera. Now, eventually, the companies, after 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, or even a month or two, found that became more and more expensive and not tenable, and they wanted the state to start doing something. And the state finally started to do that, almost all of them around the world. So I think to me, for the future, how companies are going to deal with this is they may be able to take a more active role in the management of employee happiness, employee welfare. And that leads us to the issue of burnout. This is why I'm thinking that this is probably what's going to happen. Companies are going to be more responsive and more concerned about that. So, Caroline, if you want to quickly respond, I'll see if I can find a slide and I'll put the share slides on while you're doing that.
Yeah, really, what I agree on politicians. I mean, I think that what this crisis showed, and actually we see that in polls about companies, we always have this kind of survey to know how people react to the positioning of companies, is that I think the companies have been incredible in taking care of their employees all over the world. I mean, I've seen that in my company where, we collectively and really at the central level, we took care of all the employees, making sure they had their pay during this period in places where we were not obliged to do that. And I think that there was this moment, and that's why I'm saying there's this really incredible moment in the first lockdown and then after. And this very particular moment in the first lockdown where, there was only things that matters was the security of our staff, the fact of protecting them wherever they were. And you're right to say that even on the protocol, the sanitary protocol and so on, we were very, very active, very quick. I mean, just, make sure, of course, there was this notion of responsibility, but it was more than that. I think we were all of us were touched by the situation. And obviously, I think that in what you're going to be talking about, Michael, is of course, our biggest fear is what's going to happen in terms of impact on the health of people, talking about burnout, talking about the impact on all our staff.
Okay, good. Then let's just take a look. I don't think I have this on the right share mode. You probably see the slide on reporting on burnout. Okay. So what this is again using Factiva, which is a very powerful tool. I took a look at the reporting, these number of articles written about burnout, work-life balance, global employee engagement, or employee experience. Now, let's just go through those a little bit. Now, actually, this goes back until early 1980s when burnout started. But let's just take a look at the last 30 years or so. You see, burnout was a concept that was already starting to come about. Probably when in the 1980s, when the companies were reorganizing in North America, they were downsizing, was creating a lot of stress, which probably was then translated into an issue called burnout, when you're just exhausted by what you're doing at work. A little bit later, and around the beginning of the new century, there was a big discussion of work-life balance, probably because you're talking about burnout. Well, burnout, what is burnout? How do you get to it? What do you do about it? And say, well, what if the way we manage our lives is too much to taking care of the company, not enough to taking care of us? So a big discussion of work-life balance. Well, that eventually ended up with a discussion of employee engagement, because employee engagement is the idea that the employees engage with their job, their company, their team. They really like working there. It's not just a 9-to-5 kind of job. They're really passionate about their job. And these are the best kind of employees to have, because they're committed, they're motivated, and maybe they'll work a little bit too hard sometimes and they need to dial back, but this is very good to have that. And then the discussion of employee experience, which is like customer experience. With, are employees happy to be able to interact with the HR department? Do they get the information they need? Do they feel welcome, et cetera? So these kind of things are going on, and we see that it's been a major problem for HR departments to deal with. Now, the question is, whose responsibility is it? Is it a responsibility of the employee to manage their own mental health? Is it a responsibility of the HR department to get involved, even though that might interfere with privacy issues, be invasive? Is it the responsibility of government health agencies? This is a big open question, maybe some balance between the two. But I send that back to Caroline to talk about, and then I can show you the next slide about the differences in countries in these topics.
Maybe 2 or 3 points. The first one is on the legal point of view. In any case, we as a company are responsible for the health of our employees. Like in France, for example, it's very clear we have the responsibility. So and that's really changing a lot. I mean, it's changing the way we are actually dealing with this subject, and we've been dealing with this subject for years. I always have an issue with this notion of work-life balance. I have to say, it's like I don't like this opposition of work and life. Meaning like, okay, as if something was bad in work and then you need to, take the time for the life. I think that with the arrival of all these digital tools anyway, what is important is that we give really a sense to the work. And I think that's really something that all HR now, the main issue you're dealing with, Michael, is about engagement. And this notion of engagement for me is really linked to, why am I working? What is the sense of what am I doing? What is proposing? What my company is proposing? And I think that, we've been talking about attractiveness, and we could actually spend hours talking about that. How do we attract actually people? If we are even talking about this hybrid mode, a lot of people are saying were saying to me, but why do I have to come back to the site, to the building? I'm actually good at working from home. And you need to find a real sense of why is it important to come back to a building. And that's coming back to what I was talking about, which is the social link. So, and on burnout, obviously, this is very terrifying. Because, we see actually people being exhausted by the pressure of the crisis, and of course the pressure of working in a very difficult, way of organization. But also, I have to say that we shouldn't underestimate the burnout that are linked also to the way we are dealing with communication tools. I mean, the fact of spending a whole days in front of a screen. And for me, I'm actually dealing with something very that is bothering me, is when you are in situation where you don't even put the camera on. So you don't even see people. You just see a black screen for like hours. And I think that means we will need, in order to avoid this burnout, in order to really deal with that, we are going to need to put also kind of rules of what is best, when we are interacting with this kind of communication tools.
Yeah, it makes great sense. I'm going to show you the next slide here because it talks about the differences in countries. Let's see, focus there. So this is just about burnout. Okay, this is just focusing on the term of burnout and its French equivalents. Okay. And you see during that same period that it was rising in North America, as you could expect. There, most of the discussion is there. In England, just as a comparative here for us in Europe, it was underneath in the North American experience. And France is in red. And you see in France, it was not a big issue We have been maybe better health systems. The companies are more engaged in managing that, as Caroline was speaking about. But around 2010 or so, you see it really started to skyrocket, that there was more discussion about it in France than there was in most other parts of the world. Germany, maybe not, maybe Germany had more discussion, but in France, we had that. And then there was a sudden drop over the last couple of years. I can't explain that. But what's showing is that over this last decade, this hyper globalization, the hyper competitiveness that we have in the world now, it's just putting pressure on all the different systems. And we see increasing concern about that. Now, Caroline's going to have more information about that, because who's burning out most? The young people, the middle-aged people, the older people? Where is this burnout coming from?
It's very interesting. I remember in my career, there was a time where you wouldn't say you had a burnout at all, especially in managerial layer. Why? Because it was the equivalent of saying that you're very weak and that you're not able to cope with stress. This is the way it was actually perceived 15 years ago, and I think it changed drastically with HR department actually taking more. Being more aware of what this notion was about. And by the way, very difficult, everyone is coming and saying, I have a burnout, but I mean, if you look at the medical aspect and the real definition, of course, it's more restrictive. But let's say anyone that actually not feel good at a point in time, whether it's, through depression or actually with some really physical aspect, would say it's a burnout. And I would say that it's more, I'm not sure there's more burnout today than there was in the past. I would say now people feel more at ease at saying to an HR department, I don't feel good. And also the work doctors are also making much more promotion of, how do we prevent that? And we as HR, I mean, I spend a lot of my time actually talking about this and making sure that people are aware as a manager that it can happen to it, and as employees that they need to reach out if they have problems. So I think that it was maybe more, HR were maybe more talking about that in other type of countries, but in France, I think that it really kind of raised a few years ago.
That's interesting you say that, because if we take a look at the issue of burnout by industry and by France, global or France, we see that the highest amount of burnout in France is associated with agricultural industries, which rings a little bit true because we hear a lot of news reports in France about the difficult time that farmers are having. Banking and investment and high pressure area is less. Healthcare is farther down. Now, these are the top three in France. There's lots and lots of other industries, but these are top three in France. What's interesting is that it's the inverse when you take a look globally. Globally, agriculture is the lowest, investment banking is higher, and healthcare is the highest. So what France is doing must be having an effect. I mean, you're basically trying to manage it. Now, in agriculture, there's not a whole lot. The farmers don't have managers. They are the manager, okay? But of course, in healthcare and banking, there are managers who are looking at that. So this shows to us that there's probably not one global solution to this problem. It's different depending on the industry, and it's different depending on the country.
And you may see actually very different things happening in a few months in different industry with the impact of COVID.
Okay, I probably, and just as a last thing, I'm going to stop the slides here so we can talk about COVID, is that if you want to have these slides, you have a QR code for that. You just flash that and you can download those slides. And if you want to participate later on in the COVID KPI survey, you flash that one, and then you'll be able to participate in that. So I'll leave that on the screen while you're looking for your phones, and I turn it over to Anne.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you for this interesting talks that we just had. To be honest, I just need to tell one thing to our audience. We have an incredible number of questions. I will just ask everyone to not forget to vote on the questions so that we can take the questions that are of the highest of interest to all of you. Just before that, there is another topic once again. So we start looking at differences. We looked at, we slightly touched upon cultural differences. There are also questions about this, so maybe we can go a bit more in depth about this afterwards. We talked about sectorial differences. There is one question that, of course, I would like to put also on the table, which are gender differences. So as we contemplate women's career advancement, development amid the COVID-19 particular situation, have women careers suffered more from this period? What is the impact? Do we know already? Do we see a gender gap in the workplace? And is it likely to grow in the coming months, in the coming years? What can we do not for it to grow?
I have to say I'm very worried about the impact of COVID on women career. I mean, as a woman, I remember this period of time, and I think all my friends and all my colleagues experienced exactly the same things. We were back to our home. We had to take care of everything. And I don't want to generalize. Of course, there was some situation where it was not the case, but let's say in a majority of cases, women were at home, they had to work, they had to take care of the food. I mean, that was my case. I mean, I was stopping work, preparing the lunch because the kids were there, because the husband was there. And it was like natural that I had to do it. And, taking care of everything else at the same time. And when, at the time we had the capacity, that was in France, we were the government was very protective, maybe a little bit too much, but very protective. And especially there was this notion of you could actually not work if you were keeping your children, because of course there was no daycare. And if we look at the situation, 99% of the person that took this capacity of not working during this period were women. So that's for sure, there is an impact. And they had, I mean, you could actually, if you were a man, you could choose to be at home, not working and taking care of your kid. 99% that was women. So what we are doing at the moment is making sure that we are tracing the promotions and the career paths of women and men during this period of time. We need a little bit of time, we need to have like this 2 years, 18 months. And that's a request from the board of directors. For example, at SocGen, they asked me specifically to look at the past and see if there was I'm almost positive we don't have all the data for the moment, but it's going to happen. And if we want to prevent that and to see how to, make sure that it doesn't have too much of an impact, which once again, I doubt, is when we will be in a normal mode of teleworking, it's going to be very interesting to see who choose the teleworking. Is it women? Is it men? Or are we going to come back in like 2 or 3 months with all the top guys, men being in the office? I'm here, I'm not taking teleworking, I'm here. And having all these women taking the teleworking because it's, it's easy because you have the kids and so on. And what we are doing is that we will make sure that when a manager has teams that have the teleworking, they have to be also in teleworking. And there's not like men being in the office, to prove to be close. And you were talking, Michael, about the evaluation, yeah, sure. I mean, if you hear around, your managers, it's easier to be at the end, promoted or it's human. You see the people, so you have this feeling that you know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. This is not true. I mean, you can be very far away and work as good and even better, but you have this feeling that because the people are around, they are working. When they are outside, I'm not sure. So I think that we will need to make sure that we have no difference in taking this teleworking capacity between men and women. And we will see with the track record. I'm really, and burnout, by the way, we had much more burnout with women during this period than men, just because they had to deal with a mental charge that was just amazing. And this is burnout, when you cannot cope with, your life, with the work, with everything, all this, indication of charge, of mental charge.
There's an old English expression, out of sight, out of mind, okay? Which means they don't see you, they forget about you. And yeah. I read somewhere along the line that somebody wasn't familiar with that expression. It was, somebody was non-Anglophone. So they would put it into Google Translate, and Google Translate came up with blind idiot. Okay, so but that's still there, was used for expatriates, and I think it's going to be there also. A lot of discussion about what they call presentism. Are you present on site? Okay, so that's clearly that. But Caroline, to answer your question, actually have the data to answer the question you have about women. I work with Cornerstone On Demand, which is a company that provides HR online services. I think SocGen has a contract with them. And they gave me a data set with 10 countries, about, I would say, 400 million observations. And the information is about taking online training classes, because Cornerstone is a big company for online training, and promotion, or job changes afterwards. So we have the data, and our idea is to take a look at it. It's a big data set, so it's massive to deal with, is to see whether or not women who are trained, who follow the training, do they have the same outcomes as men who follow the training? And our thinking at this particular point is that if you ask a woman, you pose a question like this, say, hi, Jane, we really like what you're doing here. We think in 3 years you could have this job if you want it. If you want that job, you should have this kind of experience, this kind of training. Do you want to do that? And Jane says, yeah, I want to do that. And then they get John. John's a different job. You want that job if you have the training for it. Yeah, John says, I want to do that. So both of them start the training for the job that they want. Now, let's say that job becomes vacant all of a sudden, really before the 3-year period. Are you going to offer Jane and John the post? Probably, because nowadays they're already in line to be trained. If you said no to them, they would be unhappy. If the training that they were taking was not required, would John continue the training? Most people I talk to say, probably not. Would Jane continue the training? Most people say, probably they would. Which means in the end, whoever has that job, if it's a male, he's probably undertrained. And if the woman has the job, she is trained or even overtrained for the job. So that's our hypothesis. We don't know if that's true, but whenever I talk to managers about it, this sort of rings true. I don't know what you think, Caroline.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we could, and once again, I and especially in HR, I don't like, caricature between, men and women, because people are very different. But you're right, and completely right, on this willingness of women of going always an extra miles in order to make sure that they deserve the position, compared to a lot of male, let's put it this way, that will, feel very easy, and they are the one being right, by the way. I think that's what I'm telling when I'm coaching women, is to say, God, ladies, if I tell you that you can have the job, just believe me. Don't always tell me, I'm not sure, maybe I should more training, or and I think that and once again, this is true before COVID. It's even worse post-COVID. So I think that's really something we need to be very careful about.
There's another issue very quickly about the future. If people have to be working from at the office, there's a customer-facing people, service people, technicians, they can't do their work from home. And so they're required to be in the office 5 days a week. And then the others can be there like 2 or 3 days a week and 2 or 3 days at home. Is the first group going to require a pay raise?
No, because I mean, honestly, the pay is not based on your presence on site. It's going to be based on your, on your profile, on what you're doing, and so on. But in any case, it's what it will bring, and we see that already, because we have a lot of positions that will not be actually able to do working from home for operational risk, because of the type of jobs and so on. there's kind of a frustration. I mean, between, you can do actually teleworking, which is still, I mean, it's very interesting. Sometimes you see managers saying, are you working today? Meaning you're working from the site, or you're working from home. Like I'm working from home is not working. And we will need to change also the mindset of managers. But yes, there is a lot. When I was talking about the impact, we don't have a clue of the impact. We will have a lot of impact, even that, what kind of remuneration, what kind of evaluation, what kind of compensation. I mean, all of this, we're still working on it.
I think there's going to be a change in English language. We used to say, I'm going to work now, which meant physically going someplace.
Yes.
And then we're going to start saying, I'm starting work now, because you could start work anywhere.
Yes, exactly.
And we're almost out of time. I think that, do you want 1 minute about the COVID KPI priorities, or should we leave that for a different discussion?
We can spend 1 minute on this. I think there's also maybe one last question, because it was very much voted on. And by the way, I also brought the gender issue on the table, because it was very much voted on. So thank you very much for all your questions, everyone. There was another question maybe that we can talk about, and I think it will be linked to your COVID KPIs, Michael. The thing is, there is Morad asking, okay, we talked about no return to business as before, to the previous HR situation. So we have another model maybe of professional life. But what they say is trust is not everywhere. And monitoring engagement, performance, making engagement happen, monitoring performance and so on is going to be different. And this person is asking, so how do you manage this in a group like Société Générale, and what are your tools to do that? And probably, Michael, afterwards we can conclude on the COVID KPIs as well, and I think related to this too.
I think one of the things we did during the COVID crisis, and this is answering the question about the tool and how do we monitor actually not only the engagement but the morale of people, is that, like all the companies, very large company will have this very heavy survey once a year, like you spend 20, 30 minutes answering tons of questions. And this time, when the crisis happened, we said, okay, there's one aspect that we don't know how to deal with, is to know exactly how our people are doing everywhere in the world. And we shifted from this very heavy survey to very short pulse survey every single week. Every single week, we would send samples everywhere in the world. Samples of questions. How are you doing? How is your morale on a scale of 1 to 7? Do you have the backup of your manager? Do you have enough communication? Do you think that we're taking care of you the right way? And it was it was incredible. And we had this survey, and then we had every single, every week or every, at the start, it was like every 2 to 3 days, we actually had this Zoom with the top managers, like the CEO with me. And it was very interesting. First time we had the CEOs plus his deputy and the HR was there. Every single 3 days, 4 days, we had this Zoom with all the employees, first with the managers and then with all the employees, just discussing the crisis, saying, okay, guys, this is what's going on. This is the morale of your staff. By the way, this is where, in Hong Kong, this is how they are. In Japan, this is how they are. In France, in Italy, and so on. And this was an incredible tool to know really on the spot how they were doing. And we did that until the end. And we are, we stopped actually a few, like 2 or 3 months ago, and not more. And I think this changing also the way of looking at the engagement. And by the way, we had people that feel good because they had the backup of the company. They really felt that we were there. And this is really the feedback we had, is you cared, you took you took the good protocols, sanitary protocols and so on, and you protected us. And I think that we need, and we don't have time now, but we can spend hours talking about what is going to be engagement tomorrow, because I think this is the real question is, what kind of elements are we going to put on the table to know how people are engaged?
Yeah, right.
Big questions there, big
Michael.
questions. Okay, then just let me run by the COVID KPIs, and because I know there's been probably some changes. This was run about 9 months ago, okay, September, October period. And the very top thing that in the respondents said managers should be evaluated on is protecting the employee health. The second one is maintaining employee performance, meaning are they getting the job done? The manager has to ensure that. Very, very close underneath of that, okay, was improving employee happiness. So the top 3 things that managers should be doing according to the respondents were protect my health, make sure I'm effective, make me happy, okay? Then after that, deploy digital tools was important. The manager's good at doing that. Enhancing customer experience was in there because that's very important in order to keep the job running. But at the very bottom was controlling costs. There was the general feeling that managers shouldn't be there trying to control costs at that period. Now, 9 months later, that might be different. You guys can click on the QR code and answer the survey yourself. But Caroline, do you want to have a last word about controlling cost? Is it going out the window for you?
I think obviously I feel like this is the right KPIs that actually we put forward. And I'm not, the only thing is I don't think our job is to give happiness to people. I mean, happiness is a very personal thing. I think we need to give sense to the work, but not happiness for sure. I just hate this notion of chief happiness officer and so on. I mean, I don't need my company to give me happiness. I just need, it contributes, of course, to my well-being. It contributes to my sense, to the purpose, and so on. On the cost, yeah, it will come back. I mean, the impact, we talked about the impact. The impacts are huge on companies. I mean, of course, we had difficult time during this period. I just hope it's not going to be the number 1 KPIs, because I don't think this is the right way to do it with employees. And for us, for example, no, it's not. It's coming back. It's not the last one. Cost is important, but obviously we're still in crisis mode, meaning we just need the security of our people and making sure also our customers are happy, because then this is also the survival of all our companies.
Okay, we defined employee happiness as improving retention, creating fun, and employee engagement. So
on that, I'm for.
Okay. Okay. Well, you have your KPIs, and you helped actually create those KPIs because you're one of the managers that I interviewed back in last summer. Thank you for that. It's a self-confirming, bias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Caroline, for taking the time to be in this webinar, to answer all the questions. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for sharing your findings in research on this pandemic period and before. And for all of those of you that are connected and on Zoom, you will receive the package also if you're interested to take part into the surveys that Michael just talked about and to read the different elements. Please feel free to connect. I wanted to say a special thank you. I think today we had a record of questions in the Q&A. I apologize that we could not touch upon all the elements that have been talked about in the chat, but there were so many, it was strictly impossible. However, I can see that somehow we touched upon most of them. This is a proof that this topic is really top of mind to many of us. So thanks a lot for sharing. And well, we will stop our webinars for the summer, but I hope to find many of you back in the next academic intake 2021, and have a good summer. And thanks again to our speakers today for sharing with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a safe summer too. Bye-bye. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you.